Republicans in the Senate are still refusing to give Merrick Garland a hearing. But the problems with Republican obstruction stretch far beyond the Supreme Court. In fact, the GOP has made it their goal to block as many court appointments at all levels as possible. And I have Howard Nations with me now to explain how this affects our justice system. Howard, it has been months since the death of Antonin Scalia. Merrick Garland still can't even get a hearing. But, that is really just the prime example of how bad Republican-controlled government can be. Because it's not just Merrick Garland. We have vacancies all across the court system in the United States. And it all comes back to that one specific thing: Republican-run government. This is by design. They don't want things to work. And, it just creates chaos. So tell us exactly, how do you see this? What's happening with the government today?
Well, this may be the year that government dysfunction catches up with the Republicans, because the mantra right now seems to be don't re-elect anyone. The new gold standard for somebody running for political office is to prove that you have no political experience. But if you want to see dysfunction at its worst, the very worst, look at the federal judiciary, both in criminal and civil administration of justice. It is severely hampered by the Republican leadership in the United States Senate, just by two United States senators. Senator Charles Grassley, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, who refuses to clear nominees out of his committee, and the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, who refuses to allow floor votes on judicial nominees.
And, see, this is a good example of why, Donald Trump is going to be their nominee, but they don't necessarily care too much about that. They can lose the White House, but the real power comes from controlling that Senate. Because as terrified as they are of losing the judiciary, as long as they hold on to that Senate, they can do this. They can go in there and act like children and say, no, we're not going to give you a hearing. We're going to, take our ball and go home, because dysfunction is their brand at this point. That's all they know how to do, because they have no original ideas. It's, we're going to block your ideas because we can't think of anything better. That's today's Republican Party.
Well, you have to understand that this dysfunction goes way beyond the Supreme Court of the United States. This is about far more than Merrick Garland. Dysfunction at the Supreme Court of the United States, where they handle 100 cases a year. You have dysfunction among the circuit courts in the United States. You have dysfunction in the district courts, where they handle 350,000 cases a year. So dysfunction at the Supreme Court of the United States comes in the form of a 4-4 tie, which you have since Scalia's death on controversial issues. The effect is that you uphold the lower court opinion. So it results in a shift of power to the lower courts. And for the first time in U.S. history, we may have two complete terms of the United States Supreme Court with a 4-4 tie. So the role of the Supreme Court as the final arbiter on major issues is being vacated and sent to the lower courts.
I think the real irony about this is the fact that these 4-4 rulings that are coming out are, against the Republicans.
They really are.
They're trying to prevent Obama from being able to place another justice, and it's a lose-lose situation for them. Either they confirm him and he, sides most of the time, I assume, with the liberal majority. They don't confirm him, and then it kills them, in their re-elections this year. But again, with these lower courts, that's really the basis of American justice. That's where, almost all of the cases are heard. Very few make it to the Supreme Court. And so what happens when we have all of these vacancies? There are dozens. We're teetering towards 100 vacancies across the country. So what happens?
One of the most important roles that the United States Supreme Court has is to resolve splits among the circuits in the courts of appeal around the United States. SCOTUS, the Supreme Court, decides splits. They establish uniformity in the constitutional law of the United States of America. And right now, as as is always true, you have very large disparities between rulings of the Fifth Circuit, for example, which is the most conservative federal court in America, and many other circuits such as the Second Circuit or the Ninth Circuit. The result is, amazingly, that American citizens' constitutional rights to due process or right to property rights or free speech rights or social issue rights such as abortion rights may differ significantly based upon which circuit you live in. Now, you cannot convince me that that was the intent of the Founding Fathers.
So we have a different, essentially, justice system depending on where you live in this country.
Right.
Up in the Northeast is different than it is, down where you are in Texas,
Yep.
which is different from what it is up in the Pacific Northwest. You've specifically, talked about the justice system in Texas. How does these vacancies affect what's happening down there?
Well, let me give you an example of that. In the Eastern District of Texas, there are 3.5 million residents, and there are supposed to be 8 district judges, and there are actually only 5. So the absence of 3 judges makes a huge, huge, huge difference in the administration of justice in the state. So what happens here is that the caseload in the Eastern District has doubled since 2009, and you've lost 3 judges out of 8. The former Chief Judge, Leonard Davis, says you definitely see a decrease in the quality of justice that the courts are able to deliver. But this applies to both business and individuals. The Sherman Court, for example, sits empty. It's one of the 8 judges that are missing. Both businesses and individuals have to wait for visiting judges to come all the way up to Sherman, which is north of Dallas, to deliver justice. Sherman is a technology center with a major patent and intellectual property court battles going on up there, but there's no judge. Businesses have to wait for years to resolve major economic issues. And there's a study going on now that shows that this has a major impact on economic growth in an area. Then you look at the other side of it, the individual justice, the effect on criminal justice. 98% of federal criminal defendants plead guilty. Sentencing is supposed to occur within 60 to 90 days. In the Eastern District, criminal defendants may wait 9 months to 2 years in county jails. And your actual court time doesn't, and that's just awaiting sentences. They're waiting for up to 2 years before they can get a federal judge who has 30 minutes to hold a sentencing hearing for them. And the problem with that is that the time that if you're sentenced to 5 years in a federal prison, you spend 2 years in a county jail waiting for your sentencing, that doesn't count against your 5 years. So you may add up to 2 years to a sentence on a guilty plea. It's a burden on the local jails. It's a denial of due process to the individuals. That's just an example of what's happening to individuals.
Well, what's interesting about all of this is that, again, this is traced directly back to Republican dysfunction, but back in 2009, for the Trial Lawyer magazine, we covered the fact that Obama did inherit a judicial emergency. We had 40 to 50 some odd openings at the time. And that's because George W. Bush was appointing some of the worst people imaginable, but they all got hearings. They got their fair hearing. They were voted down. But those vacancies grew as Obama took office. And some of the things that we saw through our work there was the fact that they were bringing judges out of retirement to go and hear traffic cases.
Exactly.
So they could take the traffic judges to have them go hear criminal case. Everybody had to basically step up. And it's a catastrophe. That's still happening today. So we're going on 8 years now, and it's because the Republicans in Washington they can't stand the thought of losing what really is one of the most powerful branches of government. And I think that's something that the people in this country do not take seriously enough, is the judiciary. They don't understand the kind of impact that it really does have on their lives every day.
And McConnell just blatantly lies about confirmations during the last year of a term. For example, in the last 16 months, the Senate has only confirmed 17 federal judges for Obama. In the last year of George H.W. Bush's presidency, the Senate confirmed 82 judges, 5-1. So since 2014, Obama had 15 district judge confirmations. In the same time frame, George Bush had 57. So it's just a lie to say, well, this is just the way we do. You don't confirm judges in an election year. But the results of the effect to confirm trial judges is what you just mentioned, judicial emergencies. That's an official designation that says that your per judge caseload is so high that it endangers access to justice. That's an official designation of the judicial system. In 2014, in January 2014, there were 12 judicial emergencies in the country. As of today, there are 32. So in other words, there are 32 federal district courts whose caseload is so large as to endanger delivery of justice. And this is compounded by the constitutional requirement to speedy trial in criminal cases. So the criminal cases go first. Civil litigants, businesses, and individuals are waiting for years to get their day in court because the Republican Senate refuses to hold hearings or floor votes for Obama appointees.
Well, it's because there's only one part of the Constitution that the Republicans actually care about, and that's the Second Amendment. I mean, the American public doesn't understand. The Republicans they're restricting our access to what we are granted under the Constitution. I mean, this is a direct violation, but they don't care. As long as it's not, hey, we want tighter gun control. Anything beyond that is don't worry about those amendments. Don't worry about those articles. As long as it doesn't involve firearms, it doesn't matter.
Well, the Republicans are running a big political gamble because if Hillary wins, she will most likely appoint a much younger and a more liberal judge than Merrick Garland. Now, Trump's already announced that he will appoint his sister to the Supreme Court if he's elected president. And you can't fault that because she's probably more qualified for the Supreme Court than he is for the presidency. But the refusing of confirmations, to get right down to the heart of it, conservative activist organizations like the Heritage Action has threatened Republican senators to give bad ratings to them if they vote to confirm any single Obama judicial appointee. So the Republican senators are not only failing to do their constitutional duty, but they're deferring that decision to the lobbyists who pay to get them elected.
And the only people who benefit from this lack of judges out there are the corporations who fund the Heritage Foundation, Exxon, the Koch brothers, the list of usual suspects. Those are the same people who fund the Republican politicians. This is their marching order, and that is do not let these judges get in place, because once they do, I got to go stand trial for poisoning an entire community, and I don't want that to happen for another 5 years so we can, come up with more evidence to try to convince a jury that we didn't do it. That's exactly what's happening, and I hope that the American public understands this. These courts are important. The Democrats need to understand the courts are so important, but right now it seems like only the Republicans understand the importance of the courts.
Well, there's one other consequence of this, too. The Republicans have done everything they can possibly do in federal court to do away with class actions. In class actions, you can literally handle tens of thousands of cases at one time before one judge in one proceeding. The Republicans have done all they can do to do away with class actions, which requires individuals to go get individual justice against a corporation, an individual to take a corporation on one-on-one in a federal court. So they're doing it to protect the corporations, but the result is they're also causing more and more delay in federal courts. And there's a very famous statement that justice delayed is justice denied, and that's exactly what we have in America today.
Howard, thank you for telling us this story. Again, I hope people take this seriously this November, because this is an emergency, and we have to protect not just the Supreme Court, but every single courthouse around this country. Howard, thank you for talking to us today.
My pleasure, Farron.